There's a good chance that you've been misled by your pastor. You've been misled if you were taught that there is a single historical narrative that runs through the Bible from Adam and Eve in the garden, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus and the early church. Yes, you can cobble together a single literary narrative, but that is very different from assuming that this entire narrative, an original pair of human beings in a prelapsarian garden of the lights, sons of God having sexual relations with the daughters of men and producing a great race of giants, a global flood and a menagerie of animals, a dramatic exodus, a series of plagues, a prophet swallowed up by a fish and spit up on the beach. Assuming that all of that is straight up history. If you were taught to assume the labyrinth of stories cobbled together to form this sprawling narrative should all be equally viewed as historical, you have been misled. Further, if you were taught that the textual, archaeological, scientific evidence for these literary events is approximately the same, that they're all well evidenced, and that each event can be believed simply on the basis of external biblical, extra biblical evidence rather than based on a pre commitment to reading the text as historical, again, you've been misled. Finally, if you were taught that these events, cobbled together in this sprawling literary narrative, could they carry equivalent theological weight for the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus narrated at the heart of the Gospels, if you think they're all load bearing for Christian commitment, if you think the edifice of Orthodox Christian doctrine will collapse with the denial of the historicity of the Adamic fall or the global flood or the exodus from Egypt or Jonah vomited up on the beach, if you think all of these are equivalent to denying the resurrection of Jesus or something close to it, again, you've been misled. Now, I get why pastors mislead their congregations, whether intentionally or unwittingly, into thinking this literary narrative, God's story, is all just straight up history. It's easier to teach the seamless literary narrative cobbled together and allow everyone to just assume it is all historical, that it is supported by solid extra biblical evidence, and that it's all just an equal theological commitment to support Christian belief. Once you pull that thread, once you introduce the literary, historical, and theological complexity of God's story to the congregation, once you show that this literary narrative is not just obviously all historical, many people will experience a crisis of faith. They will make a leap that if you question whether Jericho was razed to the ground, they will say, well, then why believe Jesus was raised from the dead? And in the old story about shooting the messenger, chances are their ire will quickly turn to that messenger, the pastor, the one who instigated this new crisis of faith in the first place. It is that pastor who was questioning the text, sowing seeds of doubt, who is probably not really a Christian. So pastors often remain silent, and congregations continue to assume the entire narrative from Adam eating a piece of fruit in the garden, Noah in the ark, Jonah coughed up on the beach. They're all equivalent to Jesus resurrected on Easter Sunday. The cost of being misled in this way is enormous. It results in entire Christian communities failing to understand the architectonic structure of Christian doctrine. It's as if Adam, Noah, and Jonah were all part of the confession of the Apostles' Creed as surely as Jesus. But that is not the heart of the Christian faith. Here's where I see the practical impact time and again. When I offer theological, ethical, historical critiques of the Canaanite genocide as conventionally understood within this cobbled together literary narrative, I'm regularly met with bitter vitriol, unrestrained antagonism, fierce anger, and indignation. You would think I was denying that Jesus rose from the dead instead of denying that God commanded the slaughter of women and children. But that is precisely the kind of perverse valuation that comes when Christians, A, are taught that Christian faith rests on a historical commitment to this entire literary narrative, and B, allow their moral formation to be centered on the collective actions of the denizens of this entire literary narrative rather than being uniquely formed by the life and teaching of Jesus Christ. So your pastor probably misled you, and the result is Christian malformation and a failure to understand the true heart of Christian doctrine, the life, death, and resurrection, ascension, and second coming of Jesus, not of Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, or Jonah, but of Jesus.